Great, we're back. In this final segment of our program today, we're going to take a very broad look at the issue of e-portfolios. Where are we today and where are we going for tomorrow? Helen Chen from Stanford joins us once again for this segment. Also with us is Barbara Cambridge, Professor of English and Associate Dean of the Faculty at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Barbara currently serves also as the Vice President for Fields of Inquiry and Action at the American Association for Higher Education. Barbara has written and edited a number of books about e-portfolios, including E-Portfolios, Emerging Practices for Students, Faculty, and Institutions. With us as well is John Idelson. John's a professor of telecommunications, multimedia, and applied computing at the California State University in Monterey Bay. And John serves as the director of the Interactive Design and Educational Applications Lab, also known at Monterey Bay as the IDEA Lab. John is a leader in the Electronic Portfolio Action Committee, EPAC, a group of institutions that have formed an informal consortium last year. That group, the EPAC group, consists of California State University at Monterey Bay, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Northwestern University, Stanford University, the University of Washington, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and ITSTE. Great. We're welcome to you all for joining us at this point. And once again, before we begin the conversation with our panel members, I invite our viewing audience, send us your questions via email and phone. All right, so Barbara, you've written some stuff. You've been active in this area for a long period of time. You've got a long view, or a long view in an area that's relatively short. What's changed in the last several years? Where have we come from? And equally important, where are we going with the whole issue of e-portfolios?
The American Association for Higher Education has, since the early 80s, been an advocate of portfolios for students, at that time print, looking at how portfolios encourage and document learning. And I think it's very important to think about this not as just a tool for documentation, but as one that supports learning. We moved from that to looking at faculty portfolios. That is, faculty need to continue learning just as students do, and how do they do that? How can portfolios help them do that? The latest work that we've been doing is with institutional portfolios, which haven't been mentioned yet today, but I think are an extremely important development. You're asking what's current now and what are we moving into the future. We know that institutions have to keep learning. They have to keep learning for their internal reasons, but also because there's higher expectation of institutions now for being able to document the kind of learning that they're helping to produce in their students.
Is this in one sense extending, if you will, the escalator on, or the model that takes us from portfolios as a resource for student outcomes and faculty assessment into institutional assessment beyond the kind of what for many seem to be pro forma accreditation reports we prepare?
One of the exciting things that's going on in the world of accreditation right now, regional and specialized, is that there's more attention being paid to student learning outcomes. If you think, for instance, about WASC, the Western Association, it is saying it is very important that all our institutions be able to document their educational effectiveness. When you work back from that, you think, how can we do that as institutions? Well, we need to have evidence of student learning. We need to have evidence that faculty are contributing to that student learning.
Great. That's helpful. Great. John, EPAC, that's an interesting mix of institutions. Stanford, MIT, Monterey Bay, some others. Where is it going to go? I mean, what does EPAC hope to do with e-portfolios, and what will EPAC be able to say a year or 2 years from now to the broader campus community and across all sectors about the e-portfolio experience?
Actually, Casey, that group that you mentioned was really the start of the Electronic Action Committee. Actually, we were going to call ourselves the Electronic Portfolio Political Action Committee because we thought everyone would get money if you're a political action committee, but we didn't come up with a better name, but it's Electronic Portfolio Action Committee. The way that name came about is really it was a planning group to start working on the focus session that we're going to do for the NLII through EDUCAUSE. And that group started with us as we were describing what we were doing on our various campuses dealing with electronic portfolios. I had a teacher credentialing program which I was part of that was using a paper-based portfolio system, but it was statewide. They decided they would do reviews of 10% of every portfolio. When they had 250 students, that was fine. They took the 25 portfolios for the 10% review and put it in the back of a card. Now they have 1,000 students, 10% 3-inch binders. They were looking at small vans, so they had to look at some other way of being able to communicate this. So yeah, actually EPAC is really part of a larger effort that is taking place with the NLII and EDUCAUSE. Actually, we have a little video that could talk a little bit about that process.
Great. Let's see that video, please.
The National Learning Infrastructure Initiative, known as NLII, is a program of EDUCAUSE, the Association for Information Technology in Higher Education. Founded on the conviction that technology has the power to transform teaching and learning, NLII programs are organized around key themes that evolve as technology becomes more embedded in higher education. These themes, such as e-portfolios, inform several focus sessions a year, as well as the January annual meeting. To learn more about NLII, visit www.educause.edu/NLII.
All right, that's great. But let's move beyond. Again, we've been talking about a small group, and some would say privileged or special group of institutions. Stanford, MIT, Monterey Bay. AHE's initiative certainly wants to go beyond that. What happens 2 to 3 years from now? How do we take the experience at Stanford?
Well, I'm going to say it's more than a small group, and I think we have to thank the AHE and their electronic. Yeah, hold up the book.
Right, let's do the book plug.
You know, I was starting looking at what I called student digital identities. You know, here we are in this digital age, but we still have to pay $3 to a registrar to send transcripts, paper transcripts. And I said, there's got to be something better than that, and I realized I opened the can of worms as soon as I was talking digital identity. And what really we're looking at transcripts, which is assessing learning. So we need better measures of assessing actual learning. And that's when I came across the electronic portfolio work connected with that digital identity. But portfolios have been used in education for quite a long time. So this sort of peak that we're having with electronic, really I think it's happening faster at some institutions because they have a culture of assessment, of public information sharing. And so, but it's not only that EPAC group. In fact, what we found out in the EPAC group and in this, that there are lots of people involved in various aspects of this electronic portfolio movement. But we really need to be sharing and have a community dialogue of what's going on, because if we don't really get to learn from each other. And that's how EPAC really started. We started sharing, saying, gee, we have some common problems, some common victories and successes, and we have interesting practices, and there were limited places to share. You could get a textbook, you could maybe visit that campus, but there's not that forum, and that's what we were trying to hope to do with EPAC and the focus group.
I think the good news from what John's saying too is that there are in fact many kinds of institutions. When we were putting together this book and doing our work and thinking about how to support this in the future, we were very encouraged to know that there are HBCUs, there are community colleges, there are comprehensive institutions that are coming at this from different angles. Some are coming at it because they have a set of student learning outcomes and they're trying to show how to showcase those. Some are coming at it from assessment and accountability pressures of various kinds. But it is the case that this is not relegated to a certain kind of institution. And I think part of that is because of the kinds of student bodies that we all have, which are students who are working students, students who, most of the students in the United States attend 2 or more institutions in their undergraduate years. So we're all needing to look at students that in fact are coming from different kinds of circumstances and from different kinds of institutions.
Where does Stanford fit into EPAC in some of this, Helen?
Well, I think a lot of the issues that have already been raised, I mean, it seems like a lot of these issues resonate with many kinds of institutions. This idea of students needing to take more responsibility for their learning and create a coherent and cohesive undergraduate or graduate education that is not just defined by what courses they've taken or what kinds of grades that they've received, and wanting to really incorporate the kinds of things that are going on outside the classroom into that undergraduate education, and then having that information documented so that it can be shared with the institution.
All right, but let me play loyal opposition here for a moment. All right, if I'm on the admissions committee to graduate school, let alone the admissions committee at an undergraduate institution, whether it's selective or not, if I'm an employer, you know, I know how to deal with, in one sense, the shorthand of a transcript, whether it's a high school transcript or test scores or whatever else it might be. All of a sudden, you're handing me not a piece of paper, but you're handing me a gig of data, if you will. And I don't have those handholds. If I'm a faculty member in a graduate department, if I'm members again of those admissions committee, if I'm an employer, where do we go in terms of then aggregating all this stuff that goes beyond, here's Casey. I mean, we know that students walk in and want that portfolio opportunity the way artists have always walked in, opened up the portfolios. Here's my work. I'm more than just the paper you see. I'm a math student, I'm an MBA student, whatever I'm a community college student transferring, wherever I might go. The filters that we've used, in one sense, you're challenging those filters. How do you help the rest of us understand what that challenge represents?
You're putting a value there. See, I sort of see you as a C in organic chemistry, Casey. You know, what does that tell you? And so what we really have with the portfolio is the ability to have some authentic student work that has been assessed and evaluated. But you were saying that gig of data. I think one of the challenges that we have in electronic portfolios, and one of the problems we had in our program, is when students first got involved in it, it was, how much can I put in it? And that, you know, we were talking about faculty tenure and promotion, sometimes that's it. The selection process, selection and reflection. So actually, if you're that committee and that student has prepared a portfolio that has focused on his or her strengths, knowing what you're looking for, then you probably have a much clearer picture. And the thing that just struck me with the project that was going on at Stanford is there's so much that goes on at Stanford that takes place outside the classroom. In fact, as a faculty, we sort of get a little embarrassed, but if you ask people 20 years later, I'm coming back to Northwestern well, a little bit more than that, we won't mention. And it's, it's not those 15 hours I sat in class that I remember. It was that time in between. And at Stanford, they were able to catch that, which really is part of that learning experience. And it's also how the classes come together. I was very impressed when the students were referring to reading what they had done 2 years before and seeing how they had changed. Because we see our students change, one of the challenges is helping them see the change, because that prepares them for lifelong learning.
Okay, but I want to come back to some of the issues that Barbara has begun to mention as well. If this becomes, if the portfolio becomes a useful step in the whole discussion of outcomes, which is long overdue. Now, again, we've had mandates from the accrediting associations going back over 20 years that institutions have to do outcomes, and most have tried to step away from that the best they can. We'll throw some stuff up. We're trying, but it's still we don't have a software for doing outcomes, and portfolios become. Isn't it the case that now we're going to start opening, if you will, we don't have transcript data, we don't have good outcome measures today. We're going to have to still open and close individual portfolios, open and close faculty portfolios, code and aggregate that in some way to say, well, it's not Casey's portfolio or Helen's portfolio as a faculty member, Barbara's portfolio as an institutional leader, but then how do we aggregate to say it's Barbara and the other 40 people at Acme College, it's Helen and the other 30 faculty members in her department, it's Casey and the other thousands of students at Acme College. How do we code this? I mean, this is a research question that ultimately takes us to the outcome measures, not of the unit of one faculty member or student, but institutions and departments. What happens in that process? Because that's ultimately where it leads, isn't it? Barbara?
Well, look at how we have, for instance, in accreditation, accredited schools in the past. We've said how many books are in the library. We've said how many FTE, all of those kinds of things that don't tell us much. And yet we got to a point where we knew how to read those. And I think your question brings up, how do we read these portfolios? We've got to learn how to read. We learn how to produce them, and we've talked a lot about what we need to put in them, how we need to select, the kind of reflection that goes there. But a student, a faculty member, an institution could do a great job with that, hand it to someone else, and that person say, what? And not understand how to take in that kind of information. So I think, Casey, you've hit on an important challenge for us, and that is how do we continue and complete the communication process by getting good readers.
Yeah. Well, I think that reading question is because we're talking about changing a culture. Is that right? For students, for faculty members, and for institutions. I mean, one of the things that I find quite interesting, AHE is unique in the sense it is not an institutional organization. The members are individuals, card-carrying in some cases. They pay dues their own, they're not institutional dues. So your members are all over the place. And AHE to take a stand in this and to take a leadership role, you've got potentially thousands of change agents out there. The early experience from AHE's leadership on this issue, where are you seeing that happen? Which institutions, if you will, although it's individual members, where is some of that going? Which institutional cultures seem to be more oriented towards the movement towards portfolios?
It's all over the place, but let me refer to a particular project. We just completed an urban university portfolio project. We were working with urban universities who felt that they're very often misunderstood. That is, the fact that their students are working 30, 40 hours a week, that they're taking 6 and 8 years to complete their undergraduate degree is often looked at askance. And yet these institutions said these students are making tremendous progress in their learning, and how do we represent that? So that group of institutions particularly saw institutional portfolios as a way to document and to demonstrate what it is they are contributing to student outcomes at those institutions. That's just one example. There are other institutions coming to this from different perspectives. We know that there are state performance indicators that are being required of many institutions. We know that the National Report Card said that not one state in the United States could be graded, if I don't like that term, but that's the one they use, graded on student learning. So there's lots of pressure on all kinds of institutions to work toward these ends.
What about role modeling, though? I mean, Helen, again, Stanford, with all due respect for everything that goes on in Palo Alto, because Stanford is now a leader, if you will, among the elite research universities in the country, the Ivies and other elite institutions, is it the case that also you are leading, or at least being a catalyst for the conversation at peer institutions among the research universities? Do you see some of that happening?
We do, and certainly the more work that we do in this area, the more we find out about what is going on at other institutions. And one approach that we take is focusing our research on the reflective component and how do you support the reflection. And that's our main emphasis rather than the actual tool building that's going on at some of our other institutions.
Yeah. And John, some of those same elite institutions, however, are part of EPAC, aren't they?
Right.
MIT, not just Stanford. Same set of circumstances?
Well, I think everyone is approaching this from a slightly different angle, and that was the issue is when we talk about electronic portfolios or even portfolios. Helen Barrett and I, in some of our earliest discussions, and Helen being from Alaska, were saying, well, you really need to put an adjective in front of it. Where they were saying the Eskimo cultures have 27 words for snow. Actually, on the internet it says it's 49, but you know, who's going to quibble? But there's so many different portfolios. There's a reflective portfolio. It might be an institutional portfolio. It might be an assessment portfolio. It might be a standards portfolio assigned by a teacher credentialing agency within a state. So there's lots of different portfolios and lots of different ways of using them. I think what we're trying to find out is how are they doing them and what is common, because it turns out that a lot of that information that, in our case, in a teacher credentialing program, that demonstrates that that teacher candidate, the teacher who's going to be a classroom teacher, is actually improving the learning of the students in her classroom. And isn't that the goal of the institution? Well, the more authentic we can get that and the more we can demonstrate that same information that could be used for the faculty to say, yes, this student teacher is progressing, also can be used for the school to assess, is that teacher doing her job? Also can help the states and the legislature say we're actually doing what we want to do. So
we're almost talking about mass customization in one sense. That it's not that it's a mass, we know how to deal with mass transcripts, but now we're going to customize that experience with a structure that becomes the e-portfolio as opposed to just the traditional piece of paper. Is that a fair assessment?
I think the other thing is, Casey, that portfolios take time, and we have to admit that. For all of us, they take time. And when you make
academic community, time?
Time, yeah, right. And then that's the precious commodity. So when we say we're going to take time, and when we say we're going to put financial resources behind this in a time when there are not many financial resources available, portfolios need to serve many purposes. And I agree with John that the more we can figure out how to take components from one and work them with the other, and in fact we're creating a social system, and if we know knowledge is socially constructed, and if we do this in a coordinated way, there's so much potential. That's why I'm interested in the Minnesota project, for instance, is taking it beyond the walls of the campus into the workforce.